But steadily moving on in the mighty Quake. We are now entering the next unit. This is a unit I actually got lost in, so try to pay attention, guys. This one's not as straightforward as some of the others, but I find this game to be very difficult to navigate anyway. I just think it's one of those things, isn't it? They're doing things at a time in such a specific way, and if you're not paying attention, you can get left behind. You got to keep up. But speaking of keeping up, the previous video I was talking a little bit about Luigi's Mansion, and I'm going to continue to do so in this one as well. The only thing I need to tell you as far as a walkthrough here, guys, is use all the resources available to you. Make sure you're using your power-ups, make sure you save frequently, and make sure you use splash damage and your human brain against these ungodly CPUs. And make sure you have a good time, because this is a great video game. But Luigi's Mansion 3 is a really cool game. And it's cool in so many ways. And it looks great, and it plays quite nice, and there's some really cool additions to the series that I do welcome and I did enjoy. And I sit here in some ways as quite a fraud, because I have not played the sequels to this series at all. I've only just played the third game, and I have not played the Game Boy Advance one, the Game Boy 3D DS thing. The Dark Moon. It's coming to Switch in the coming year. They're apparently remastering it with some better visuals, and I'm definitely going to try it out on the Switch emulator. And I suppose at this point, I can't really be an authority of any type. Be careful of the parasites, guys. These dogs are everywhere. And that tongue that they do strips you of HP really quickly, so make sure you shut them down as swiftly and as expediently as you can. And then save. But I never had a 3DS. I'm not a big fan of handhelds. Like, when I was younger, I loved the Game Boy Advance. I did a lot of things on the Game Boy Advance because I think the games on there were super essential, but as consoles got better, I felt handhelds fell behind for me personally in what I wanted. They seemed to be more about nostalgia and the glory days than truly doing anything too cool. So a lot of it just turned into like, how many times can we release Pokemon before people realise we're literally doing nothing different? And as you can imagine, Nintendo being Nintendo, that number would be quite high, because they've been doing it for fucking 30 years. But I didn't get the 3DS, so I didn't have access to the Luigi's Mansion sequel, and I looked at it, and you know, my heart kind of ached and yearned, because it was a very special time in gaming. But in truth be told, I didn't think it looked that great. And I don't know if this is just like nostalgia brain and rose-tinted Halcyon lenses, but I feel like Luigi's Mansion has a look and a feel and like a form to it that they didn't really try to capture in the sequels. They took some features, but they kind of turned it into its own thing that built upon it aesthetically, and I think that's fine. I think that's a good idea. Careful of these guys, I hate this enemy with its stupid shield. But I think it's admirable to take it in its own direction and keep evolving it, and Nintendo always do that. They establish a hero, they change how it looks, they change permutations of it, and they build, and some are better than others, and some get beloved, and most of them are decent, and there's generally none that you can say are bad. So the second game looked very, you know, handheldy, but still maintaining what that series is about. And then this new game kind of pulls the camera out quite a lot, and shows you a bit more scope, and then focuses in on just taking it to that next level, which is still adhering to the standard Luigi's Mansion look, but not quite to that original GameCube look. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's not a good-looking game, because it is. You know, some of the lighting and the particles, some of the features and some of the perspective, some of the tricks that Nintendo are doing to keep it fresh and continue to evolve it, I think is really admirable and really cool. But in their ambition to evolve it, to take it to new places, to make it fresh for, you know, some of the experienced players again, or the people that weren't as smitten with it as, for instance, I was, they've taken it now to a place where I just don't think it's the same. And I just don't think... I would go as far as to say, and this might be controversial, I don't think it's very Luigi's Mansion-y. And this might seem really strange to a lot of people, because if you've, for instance, not played the first game and you've played the second game and the third game, then I would imagine that these games are quite comparable and very similar to each other. But the first game is not like that. You know, the first game is such a specific thing, and as misunderstood as it was, I loved it. And I loved it for very specific reasons that seem to have been looked upon as almost a vestigial limb that does not need to be taken forward to the next generation, so they've trimmed it, and they've shaped it, and they've moved it to a different direction and made it into something else. And what they've moved it into is going to appeal to a lot more people than the thing that I Cherish did. And the first game, for me, is so perfect in so many ways of exactly what I wanted it to be. Because the thing that Luigi's Mansion gets so right is that it is a simple game. It is a simple game with simple concepts. But it uses simplicity in such a clever way. And it understands what it is. And I do think there are a couple of missteps in it that do detract a little bit, but fundamentally it gets more right than it gets wrong. And I think that simplicity is really, really hard to do. And I think that's my main critique of Luigi's Mansion 3 after getting to the end of it and seeing everything it has to offer. It's this idea that they must have felt like it wasn't enough. And maybe to them creatively it wasn't. But to me, it would have been, you know. So they've stretched it now, and they've built on it in ways, and they've added things, and there's a lot of platforming now that they've got going on, which involves using the physics and involve using certain aspects of the game world, which is interesting and it's cool. But it feels like a Mario game, or a Kirby game, or a different type of game. It doesn't feel like Luigi's Mansion. And then you go to all these different places, because the thing I like the most about that game, that first game, is that you go to a scary house, much like Resident Evil, and the whole game is that scary house. And they take liberties with it. You know, they give it all kinds of oddities here and there and creative concepts, but they take something really simple, really mundane, and they elevate it by necessity. Because what can you really have inside of an stately home? You can't have that much, but if you try hard enough, you can have just enough variations that it's constantly keeping you guessing and it's constantly using the tropes. And I think that this might be more projection than anything, but I really, really like that setup. I like the idea of a character going into a big house, a big, opulent house, plenty of rooms, plenty of areas, wings and floors and basements and things and rooftops and balconies and mezzanines. I love the structure of this unknown blueprint of just fanciful decor and obscene, you know, function rooms. That to me is so appealing. And the reason that Luigi's Mansion does it so well is because not only does it fully commit to that aesthetic, fully commit to that concept, it keeps it simple, but it trims the fat and it keeps it lean. And maybe to some people, it's too lean, you know? Maybe to them it becomes boring and it's rote and it needed more. And I can understand that because, ironically, I'm usually the guy saying that about every other game. But for whatever reason, Luigi's Mansion for me gets it right. It gets it in a balance that I look for. And this is where Luigi's Mansion 3 doesn't. Because it doesn't really feel like you're in a mansion. It doesn't really feel like you're taking that simple concept. Because, for instance, the combat now has been simplified, but they've given you more tools to give it the complexity that previously its mechanics had. So in the original Luigi's Mansion, shining the light on the ghosts was how you stunned them, and of course different ghosts have got different things that you need to do. But doing so led to a freeze moment, and then you could hoover them, and then hoovering was an interesting game of essentially pushing the analog in the opposite direction to where they were moving. And in the new game, this is very much the case. You still wrangle the ghost in a similar fashion, but once they connect to the poltergust, you now have access to this slamming feature, which is a really cool idea, but I think it takes over the priority of like vacuuming the ghosts. And you can kind of stay out of the range of it getting sucked into the hoover and constantly keep them on the edge of the hoover and vacuum them the conventional way. But you should almost never do that because it's very slow and doesn't seem to be what the developers wanted you to do. So instead, what it leads to is you stun the ghosts, which is cool, and then you suck them up, and then as soon as you fill the circle when you're sucking them, you can then start slamming them. And then you can time the slams, and you can get like 7 slams if you time it well, even though sometimes it feels a bit choppy and a bit sloppy and a bit input droppy, buffer heavy, kind of awkward, where you feel like you pressed it and nothing happens. But that might be emulation, that might be the Switch, I don't know what that is, but sometimes it feels really good, sometimes it feels like it's fucking just clowning you. And then after that, the ghost will go away if you didn't kill it, and then you stun it and you repeat the same sequence. And you could argue that this is the same. In the original Luigi's Mansion, stun it with a torch, suck it up. Same as the new one. Stun it with a torch, suck it, slam it, right? But it's not. In 3, you feel like every ghost fight's the same. Every single one. You just suck to slam, and then you win. There's one aspect of it which I really like, which I wish you could use more, which is when you slam it and you control the slam, you injure other ghosts. So you can corral a lot of the spooks to come towards you, you can get a bunch of them, and then start slamming what you've got into whatever's remains, and then as you let go of those ghosts, you can stun with the torch and go immediately into sucking the next guys, and you can turn the fight into that. But sadly, it's really easy to do. And because it's so easy to do, within the first few rooms and maybe 1 or 2 floors, you already feel like you're completely in control. Like, I no damaged the first 4 floors of that game without really trying. And I never lost my hoover connection at all, because I was never in the risk or in the threat of it happening, because it was all a little bit too pedestrian. And you might not see a problem in this, you might be like, well, Chris, it seems that you were good at it and your skill enabled you to win. But I wasn't good at it. I'm good at Luigi's Mansion 1, because I've played it dozens of times. I've never played this game. I'm supposed to not know what I'm doing. I'm supposed to have to learn the nuance here, but it seems like the nuance is so shallow that within a couple of minutes you're already kind of at the top of the pyramid. And this is not to say that there's not hidden complexity. I am sure that if you watch like a speedrun, they'll show you some fascinating tricks and techniques that they're using that makes it a bit more interesting, and if I were wanting to spend more time with the game, I would definitely be finding that and learning it and moving forward. And I do think the idea with Luigi is kind of interesting, being able to control 2 people at the same time and have 2 suctions, but I feel like that's a mechanic that's completely underutilized and you never really need to do it, and because of the way it controls, and because the controls in general don't feel that great, you're really slow, you've got tons of startup, you're super fucking slippy, like the whole thing is just not very satisfying to move. And then when you use your friend, there's so much delay between activating, deactivating and whatnot, you can't sync up in a meaningful way that makes it feels like there's any real execution. And I really wish you could use both characters at once. I really wish there was like a lock-on system you could implement when you suck somebody up, and then you could just use the other analog to move Luigi at the same time as you and sync up and do really fascinating things, but maybe you can. I couldn't find a way. And what ends up happening is they give you these tools, like the ability to have 2 people sucking, which you would think, I mean, it sounds great, doesn't it? But in this game, it's not really implemented in any way that makes it feel like they wanted you to use it as an advanced tactic. So what they do is they implement some other things, and these might be hold-alls from the previous Luigi's Mansion, I don't know. In the original Luigi's Mansion, you have a torch and you have the ability to suck, and then you have the elements. You have the fire, you have the water. I think that's kind of it. And then you have the Game Boy to take pictures and stuff and look in mirrors and you know, the mouse holes and things, which is not in this game, which I think is sorely lacking. So they give you these tools, and these tools are, it's essentially, they're shapes to fit in specific shape holes. And then the whole game turns into, find the shape that has an effect on the enemy. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with an enemy having a set weakness and you having to find it. And I think that a lot of the enemies are really well designed, because you'll have to do a certain sequence of things to shut them down, to stun them, and then you can vacuum them. And I like this. I like it on some of the bosses as well. Some of the bosses have got a really nice engagement that you do with them, and then you can start vacuuming them, and it turns into a bit more of an event. And they'll involve things such as hoovering the glasses off their face so you can stun them with the torch, sticking the plunger to them and then slamming them and then being able to attack them that way, because there's another ability where you can stick a plunger to people and use it to pull. And there are all these tools that work together to enable you to engage with the world and overcome the baddies and what they're doing. And one of them is a ground slam. You can do like a butt slam to jump in the air, and you can use it to avoid ground projectiles and to stun enemies. And then you can chain stuns into your torch and into your plunger and several other things. And all of them are clever and they work, and you can implement them in the world. But because once you've found out the weakness, once you've figured out what it is that the person that you're taking on doesn't like, because after that it turns into just suck the ghost up and slam, no matter how intricate it is to unveil the ghosts, and it is quite intricate until you figure it out, and there is a system, no matter how you do that, you will always then be fated to do the same thing, which is to suck them and then slam them. And later on, like, one of the final bosses is absolutely horrendous. Both of the final bosses are terrible in the game, which I'm not going to critique Luigi's Mansion 3 for that, because I feel like the bosses in the first game weren't great, and I think that the final boss is one of the worst. And I don't know why Luigi's Mansion is obsessed with these mechanics where they involve detection that the game does by itself. In the first game, I think didn't you have to like freeze the boos, suck the boos up and then fire them at him or something like that? And freezing the boos in 3D space with the depth perception was a pain in the ass until you got better at it. And it took a while, and even when you were good, it could still be quite frustrating. In this game, you have to hoover bombs up and fire bombs that have this auto-targeting, but the auto-targeting is fucking sticky and weird and stupid and awkward. And it's just not fun. It leads to being really annoying. And I think it's a shame, because they had an opportunity to make the bosses more interesting and more fun. And the early bosses, like the first 7 or 8 floors of bosses, I did quite enjoy. But then after that, they became annoying. The Egyptian one was really annoying. And then after that, annoying. It really started to just like push the fucking wisdom tooth, and the pain from there on was unbearable. And it's a shame. That being said, I still think that they're cleverly designed, I still think they look good, and I still think conceptually they're pretty cool. I just did not find any of them to be fun. And this is where I have a huge problem, especially comparing it to the first game, which is, I've just said that it feels like every combat encounter is the same, and you might be thinking, well, in Luigi's Mansion 1 you stun them with the torch, or however you wanted to stun them, and then you suck them up. And you suck them up the same way every time. You suck them until 100 life, it goes down to 0, and then you win. And you're correct. But here's where the rubber meets the road for me. In Luigi's Mansion 1, sucking up ghosts is hard. It's tricky, because they can break off you. They can pull you into a hazard and you'll drop them. So being able to suck a ghost from full life to 0 in one successful engagement is a skill. And it's a skill that is not immediately apparent on how you do it. And there's mechanics there that let you get better at doing it, that lead to it being a bit more consistent. And of course, it's still not completely consistent, because the way that you get pulled seems to be quite random. It seems to be quite, oh, he's going this way, he's going that way, it all depends, and it's different every time you do it. But because there's this mechanic of pulling against it, like you would if you were a fisherman, you get really good at getting ghosts quicker. And you swiftly realise that, oh, just holding backwards sometimes is not enough. Sometimes you want to hold like just off centre from backwards and just off centre the other side. And you learn this technique of like rolling the analogue down left, down right, and you hear the noise in the game where it's doing like the dilly 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 dilly, and the faster that noise is doing it, the more successful you're being. And it turns into this mechanic of, it's almost like the manual in Tony Hawk of being in the right spot and following the right curve so you don't fall over. But instead you're following that noise, and because you've got that feeling, that like kinetic and tangible feeling with the game, you get really into trying to get that hyper and kill those ghosts as quick as possible. And sometimes you might be really good at it, sometimes you might be off, and it leads to failure, but you feel like you have to be on it when you're hoovering them up. And in Luigi's Mansion 3, when you start hoovering the ghosts, it feels like you're just gonna win, and even if you don't, you're just gonna grab them again and then you're gonna win. And because there doesn't seem to be any real loot attached to the ghosts, there doesn't seem to be any risk. And it feels really weird. Ooh, this room is tricky, guys. There's a couple rooms coming up here where there's a balcony and there's a main room and there's enemies everywhere, and it's really easy to get overwhelmed here, so be careful, save, and use your tools. But it felt like in the first game, learning to hoover the ghosts became a real skill that took mastery, and you're never as good as you want to be, even if you've had a really good run. You still feel like, oh, if I could have just done this and I could have just done that, it could have been a bit better. And because of that, it makes it feel throughout the whole game like you're improving. Whereas in Luigi's Mansion 3, maybe I just had too much knowledge of the first game and I came in and immediately I knew what I was doing and I was being effective, but it felt like they turned it into an automatic suction game, because all you did, suck and slam, suck and slam, suck and slam, that was it. And it killed a lot of the development and the skill ceiling on the combat. But the bigger issue I found is after those early zones and those early rooms being like, you remember this series, remember this, once they'd established this is Luigi's Mansion, remember this, they then moved into this is Luigi's Mansion 3, we're going to augment this and change it, and you went from doing a fight every room to doing no fights, and then one fight, and then no fights, and then chasing a cat, and then no fights, and then a ton of fights. Like, the combat pacing was all over the place. And it made no sense to me. Because I love fighting in Luigi's Mansion. I love going in the room. I love trying to find where the ghosts are hiding. I love destroying them. And then I love the reward of being able to loot the room. And I feel like that flow in this game wasn't there at all outside of those first few areas. Because it got to the point where, instead of even looting, because some of the levels when you suck everything in the room, you don't get much. You don't get many coins, you don't get many bars, you don't get many jewels, and instead they've gone for this system where there are secret interactions on the level that give you these, essentially like the emeralds that you get in Sonic. Every level's got 5 of these multicolored gems, and you do these engagements and these interactions to get them. And some of them are very cool and very clever. They involve interacting with the world just like you did in the original Luigi's Mansion, but it almost becomes like a collectathon, like Banjo-Kazooie, the natural Luigi's Mansion, because none of them are hidden behind what the first game did so well, which for me personally was the portrait ghosts. So in Luigi's Mansion 1, you would go through the rooms, you would solve these little isolated puzzles that didn't take too long, and there were these little brain teasers and they were very satisfying to circumvent. And then what would happen is you would glimpse a ghost you couldn't get. And you're like, whoa, there's a big guy here, what do I do to this man? And then you had to kind of analyse the room and figure out what the game wanted. And then once you'd done that, you realise that, oh, if I move this curtain, the sunlight comes in this room, or the moonlight comes in this room, and you can see this person who's combing their hair in the mirror. They become, corporeal, you can stun them with a flashlight, and then you can suck them up. And then you're in for a ride, because these are big ghosts, and they're powerful, and as you're sucking them, all of this currency's falling out of them, these wonderful pearls. And then you're sucking, you're fighting, they're really, really giving you a good one. And then you either drop them, and then you're like, damn, I dropped them, and you try and do it again, you have to stun them and everything, or you do them all in one go, and you get the ultimate reward, which is this perfect pearl. This pearl that's worth like 1 million or 2 million. And learning to get all the ghosts in one perfect pull is really tricky. Super tricky, quite annoying sometimes, but it's part of the execution, the skill ceiling of that original game. And once you realise this, you realise there's 50 of those ghosts, I think, 50, 52 or something. There's a lot of those ghosts, and learning to get all of them perfectly is replay value, and it's part of being good at Luigi's Mansion. And of course there's a lot of luck involved, and of course there's that one guy in that freezer room that's an absolute fucking nightmare, you all know him. Like, of course there's going to be still problems. It came out in 2001, gaming was different then, it was a lot harder. But it gave you this wonderful carrot on a stick, where when you were exploring trying to find Mario, not only were you getting these new abilities, but you were moving through these new zones, and each of them was so clever and so self-contained, and there really was a sense of wonder and a sense of awe. And then once you'd beaten the new ghosts or taken down the guys trying to kill you, you'd come up against this new challenge of this portrait ghost. And the whole game becomes go into this room, clear it, loot it, portrait ghost, take him down. And you wondered what the next portrait ghost was going to be and what the challenge would be and how you revealed them. And when you first played the game, you might not even find them all because some of them are a little sneakier than others, and you might have not just been savvy enough to realise you could interact. But you start finding the treasure rooms and you start finding those hidden money ghosts, and a lot of these mechanics are in Luigi's Mansion 3. But they're done in a way that kind of gets rid of what made them so special in the beginning. And the real reason for this is Luigi's Mansion 3 is too long. It's way too long. One thing you'll learn when you play the first game is that the mechanics of ghost hunting, looting, and exploring are balanced in such a way that they just start to overstay their welcome as they shift. And the moment they shift, you're renewed again. And then by like 5 hours, you've beat the game. And that's, I mean, it might not be 5 hours, it might be closer to like 8 on your first playthrough, depending on if you know what you're doing, or if you're not exploring and you're not backtracking. But if you just play kind of casually and you get in there, you're going to beat that game in under 10 hours comfortably, and you're going to have a great time, minus maybe a couple of awkward moments. This new game is double that length easily. All the reviews said it takes about 20 hours to beat it. I beat it in 13 hours, and I feel like it was twice as long as it should have been. And I'm not saying that they didn't come up with great ideas to fill it. They did. I think every floor visually is cool to look at. They've all got their own theme. They've all got lots of puzzles and ideas going on and lots of things to discover and cool features. But there's just this sense of the closer you get to the higher floors, the less like Luigi's Mansion it becomes to be. Because you go from hunting ghosts and doing these small little isolated like physics puzzles and mind and like, you know, brain teasers, and you stop the fighting and you don't have the, you know, the portrait ghosts to find. You don't have all the boos to hunt, even though they do reveal some boos early on and you find those, and then I didn't see any later on. I don't know what was happening with that. Maybe I fucked that up somehow. But it starts to go wholeheartedly into world concepts. And Luigi's Mansion 1 didn't do this. And the areas that came close to doing this were the weaker areas of the game. They kept the concept modest, and they refined it to a point that it was really satisfying to do. And this is, I think, where you're either going to love the third game or you're going to dislike it in ways that I did. Which is, like, you start using Luigi as a puzzle-solving tool now. So you're using him to, you know, like, open gates while you're on a rubber dinghy moving through the water. And you're using him to pull things so that you can do these physics puzzles so you can get on top of bookcases and whatnot. And in the first game, the most complex puzzle in the game involves watering a plant. And if you water this plant consistently at the right times, you get a nice reward on the treasure, and it's kind of a cool little Easter egg that you might not known about, and it's how you get the perfect score if you get all the money. In this game, one of the more complex puzzles is going into 4 separate televisions that lead to 4 separate worlds that have 4 separate themes, and in one of those worlds, you take a bottle cap, you take it to another world and fill it up in a well with water, you then take it into another medieval world where there's a war happening on a tower, and you water a beanstalk that lets you climb the tower to get the head of a sconce, so that you can take the sconce into another level that's got all these fires happening, set it on fire, and then take it to the other world so that you can burn a web and get a megaphone for a director. And the whole thing is just not very fun, I didn't think. I just felt like it was like, I don't want to be solving puzzles in Luigi's Mansion, not like this. A puzzle in Luigi's Mansion is which of the chests of drawers do I bang on to get the boo out of? Because my Game Boy is glowing, and I know he's in here somewhere, and he's going through the walls and he's being a dickhead. That's a puzzle in Luigi's Mansion. Like running on a treadmill for an extended period of time until money fires out of it like confetti. That's a puzzle in Luigi's Mansion. Doing this stupid shit with all these parts is not Luigi's Mansion. It's Mario. It's something else. And again, it's not bad. It's cool. It's clever. It's just long enough to be invested, and just complex enough that you have to engage yourself, you know? But it's not what I want to do. And then the worst part is, you're not even hoovering any fucking ghosts while you're doing it. So it's just like, can I get back to hoovering the ghosts? Remember that thing? And the part where I have the most problem with this, because you might be thinking like, dude, I can't believe you have this issue with this game. It's just Luigi's Mansion, you know, just puzzle solving, hoover some ghosts, find some treasure. But it's one of my favourite games of all time, and I would love for them to do it again in a modern context, but with some of those old school sensibilities. So I'm sitting here playing this game, and every level from that one onwards, from the castle onwards, it's just more puzzles, more puzzles, more puzzles. And some of these puzzles are really interesting and really cool, but it's just like, I don't want to do this. I can do this in other Nintendo games and really enjoy it. This is the type of stuff I'm going to do in Zelda. I don't want to play Zelda when I'm playing Luigi's Mansion. I want to play Luigi's Mansion. And I have a real problem with this, because this is the kind of thing that Ubisoft get crucified for, but Nintendo don't.